And I would like now to introduce Mr. Salai Za Uk Ling. Before I give him the floor, I would just like to present him briefly. So he is Deputy Executive Director of Chin Human Rights Organization. And since the 1990s, this organization has been documenting the human rights situation in Chin State. Chin State is a remote region in the west of the country on the border with India. The Chin people are majority Christian and have long accused the Myanmar military, which is majority Buddhist, of religious persecution. Since the coup, amid widespread resistance, the Myanmar military has poured high numbers of troops into the Chin State, where it has been accused of burning churches and killing religious figures. Thousands of people have fled Chin State for India. So I would like now to hand over to Salai Za Uk Ling. Please take the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you all the distinguished MPs. I thank you for giving me this opportunity to appear before you this evening to speak about the situation of Chin people under the military junta of Myanmar, which call itself the State Administration Council. As just introduced, my name is Salai Za Uk Ling, and I represent the Chin Human Rights Organization, a group that has been documenting human rights situation of the Chin people for the last 27 years with a UN ECOSOC special consultative status since 2018. With permission, I would like to share something as I speak. I'm here to speak to you about the humanitarian consequences of the attempted coup with specific regards to the situation in Chin State, where I come from. I'm doing so with the view of reminding all of us to stay laser focused on who is responsible for the horrors of the past year and a half and the urgent need for accountability and justice for the crimes committed thus far with complete impunity. Let us be very clear that as we speak today, the chief criminal mastermind who presided over the killings and mass atrocities against the people of Myanmar, General Min Aung Hlaing, is freely traveling internationally and visiting Russia, and the arm of the international justice system is yet to reach him for the crimes he has committed. But I hope that this hearing will be the beginning of laying an important groundwork and providing impetus for advancing accountability and justice process in Burma. That said, for the past year and a half, Chin State, with a Christian majority and a population of just below 500,000, or just 1% of the country's total population, has not escaped the kinds of atrocities and terrors at the hands of the Myanmar army. In fact, the state has been one of the primary targets of the military's campaign of annihilation. I'm using the word annihilation here because this is the exact word used by the junta's spokesperson right before the start of their brutal campaign, military campaign in Chin State around April last year. This should be emphasized because it was a public expression of criminal intent for what the army would be doing in the ensuing months. Our organization has closely monitored and documented incidents and patterns of the gross violations of human rights by the military over the period, and this is what we have found as of this month. The unlawful deaths or extrajudicial killings of over 250 Chin civilians, unlawful arrest and arbitrary detention of over 1,100 people, the deliberate and intentional destruction of livelihood and civilian properties, including the burning of over 1,800 houses across Chin State, the vast majority of which took place in my hometown, Tantlang, over the course of more than 30 separate attacks. the destruction of 65 religious buildings, including over 50 churches or places of worship, the forced displacement of an estimated 120,000 people, which constitute 20% of the entire population of Chin State. As you can see, despite being only 1% of the entire population of Myanmar, Chin State has suffered from this disproportionate share of serious human rights violations and related humanitarian crisis. The Tatmadaw is currently sending in 2 large military columns into Chin State, and there's been intense fighting in the north over the past 3 weeks. Soldiers from LID 22 have burned down 3 villages in Hakha and Phlam townships and summarily executed 2 civilians during this latest expedition. Fighting is also flaring up in the south as the reinforcement convoy is traveling from Pakoku in Mugwe as we speak. The SAC troops are blocking all access routes to Chin State and preventing commercial traffic and basic commodities from entering to the area, including international humanitarian aid. This is all part of a strategy aimed at collective punishment under the four-cut practice. The objective is to establish strategic military dominance in the region by depopulating the entire region or pushing people into a situation of starvation and eventually forcing them into submission under the military's control. There's no end in sight for these gross violations being committed with impunity. The international community must swiftly and decisively act to tackle the culture of impunity and address the humanitarian needs of the people in the region. Every day that action is delayed is another day that more people are dying and suffering. Something consequential needs to be urgently done to address the unfolding humanitarian disaster. CHRO recommends the following course of actions for the international community. Firstly, to take all measures to reject the legitimacy of SAC and deny their participation at any regional, multilateral, or international spaces, including all the ASEAN platforms. We applaud countries that have recently boycotted the Security Summit in Russia this week, including New Zealand, Australia, the United States, and possibly South Korea and Japan as well. To adopt a more proactive, coordinated, and direct approach towards Myanmar by stopping the usual approach of deferring everything to ASEAN, which has failed miserably. Directly engage with and urgently make flexible funding and resources available for local CBOs and CSO networks who are providing humanitarian assistance to IDPs and refugee communities, especially through cross-border operations. Enable or increase funding for monitoring and human rights documentation work towards accountability and justice for international crimes committed daily by the military junta. Designate, and this is an important point, all the civil servants across the country who continue to boldly defy the junta through the civil disobedience movement as frontline human rights defenders to enable them to access channels for direct financial support for their brave human rights work. Thank you very much, and I'd be happy to take your questions now.
Yeah, thank you so much, Za Uk Ling. You have described extremely vividly the atrocities, and you said there's no end in sight, and the international community should definitely act swiftly. So the questions that could be asked from you to start with, that indeed, can you still describe the main actors who oppose military rule in the Chin State? And I would be interested also to know the situation regarding religious freedom in Chin State since the coup. Of course, we heard of many of these atrocities that have a religious character, but persecution, I mean. So please, perhaps you could answer these questions, and then I hand over to my colleagues.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the great question. Starting with the religious freedom issue, post-coup situation. So the limitation or on freedom of religion or belief for a Christian minority in Chin State is not something new under this military regime. Even in the best of times, we have had discriminations directed towards the Chin for their Christian identity and, of course, ethnic identity as well. So if you look at the situation under the previous NLD government, nothing concrete was done to remove sort of barriers that place limitations on religious minorities. So of course, under the current military regime, things are more violent and more visible. And as I just presented, we have seen the destruction of over 50 churches and some 15 religious buildings over the course of 1.5 years. So in places where the military is launching actively engage in military operations, the first thing they target is the church. So they would shell on the church to make sure that nobody is inside the church, or they would go into the church and take the church as shelter, because they know that the Christian resistance movement would not attack them inside the church. So they have been going around defiling churches and destroying them after they have slept in it. So these have become a pattern. And of course, in other places, there's also been, destruction of Buddhist religious sites or monasteries. But the pattern here is quite different in Chin State and more violent after the coup.
Would anyone else want to take the floor, please, for questions?
May
Mercy.
I go? Yeah,
Yes,
okay.
Mercy, please take the floor.
Okay, thank you, Heidi. Thank you very much, Mr. Salai Za Uk Ling. Your presentation is very helpful for us. As you said, that the situation and the borderline between the Myanmar and India, could you please give concrete explanation about the Indian contributions to, especially for the humanitarian assistance across the border situation between the Myanmar and India? Can you give something concrete that the aid has been ensured to be reach those in the inmates? The second is about the corridor, humanitarian corridors. I don't know, between the Thailand and Myanmar, or Indian and Myanmar. What do you think about the humanitarian corridor? What kind of the humanitarian corridor could be implemented effectively? Thank you.
Thank you, and over to you, Za Uk Ling.
Thank you for the question. Despite the large number of people coming to India as refugees over the past 1.5 years, the local host communities have been very kind and generous in welcoming and supporting the refugees from Myanmar, especially from Chin State. So we have a very sympathetic and supportive host, local state government, as well as the people themselves. So these people from Mizoram state have been sharing whatever that they have with the refugees and making sure that they have shelter and that they are provided for. And of course, there isn't enough resource, after a year without any kind of international support coming into the area. So people are relying on the generosity of the local host, but that's nowhere near sufficient or sustainable. And we are becoming more concerned about the likelihood of more refugees flooding into the area once the monsoon season is over and there's imminent attack, a large-scale offensive taking place in Chin State. That's going to push more people to flee from the area and possibly into more people coming into India. And we are now in monsoon season where travel is difficult and there's all kinds of diseases that people need to worry about. We have a malaria outbreak recently that spread across all the 9 townships in Chin State, and the IDPs are infected with malaria, and there's no medicine or supplies available because the military is blocking all the access roads leading into Chin State. So people rely on what little resource is there from Mizoram State that is being transported across the border into the IDP camps. So what we would like to see specifically from the international community is a concerted effort to increase or actually make humanitarian aid available to the region by any kind creative means, so that people have the ability to stay alive in the months to come. So we really need the international community to pay attention to what's going on and to urgently provide humanitarian assistance to the area. Thank you.
Sorry, may I get some information related with the, from your perspective, related with the humanitarian corridor? Is it important now, or what do you think about it?
Yeah, the India-Burma border is quite a porous, international border where people go back and forth, and India has been very kind enough to not push people back to Burma, but it also depends on the local state government where, the case is different. For example, in Manipur state, people coming from Sagaing in the northwest have been having, trouble crossing the border, and people are turned away at various times. But the majority of people do make it across the border, but there's no consistent policy that applies to all the border areas. But for the Chin, we've been very lucky to have the Mizoram state, which is also ethnically related to the Chin and culturally, akin to the Mizo. So, as long as there's resource, there's a mean to easily deliver humanitarian aid from across the border.
Thank you. You mentioned a very interesting idea that the civil servants, people in civil service who resist the Tatmadaw and the coup, should be designated as human rights defenders. And perhaps firstly, you could describe a little bit this admirable work that they do under the conditions of extreme stress and danger, and what practical implications you as a human rights organization and the representative of human rights defenders see that this could have.
Yes, we call for their designation as frontline human rights defender because they are the ones who are sustaining the resistance movement, and the revolution has come as far as where it is today because of their bold defiance of the military. Now, the groups like PDFs and other armed resistance group they were formed to protect the movement of the CDM, and the CDMers are, defenseless, and they risk all their own security, their own livelihood when they walked out of their jobs in protest. They gave up their salaries and their only means to feed their family. So when you talk about one civil servant protesting out of principle and resigning or not going back to work, there's a lot of sacrifice involved, physical security as well as their livelihood security for the entire family. So because they are often the bread earner of the family, so they need to be recognized for their active role in making sure that the military doesn't have the level of control that it doesn't command today. So it's all because of them, their resilience, that this revolution is going forward as we see it now.
Unmute, right? Yeah. Are there still questions to Za Uk Ling? I don't see any, so it's my honor to thank you and for your admirable fight and defense of your own people. And please stay in touch, and if there's any information that you want to submit to our inquiry, then please do so. So I thank you.